Marcus Sterling had built walls around his heart higher than the skyscrapers that bore his family's name. At 35, the tech mogul had learned to read people like stock reports, dissecting their motives with the precision of a surgeon and the cynicism of a man burned too many times. When Elena Vasquez walked into the charity gala that October evening, her flowing emerald dress catching the crystal chandelier's light, Marcus saw exactly what he expected to see: another beautiful woman with calculated charm and expensive taste, drawn to his net worth like a moth to flame. He couldn't have been more wrong, and the truth would shatter everything he thought he knew about love, loyalty, and the woman who would change his life forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The grand ballroom at the Meridian Hotel buzzed with the kind of energy that only came when San Francisco's elite gathered for a cause. Tonight's event benefited childhood cancer research, a cause close to Marcus's heart ever since his younger sister had battled leukemia as a child. He stood near the bar, nursing a glass of aged whiskey, his sharp gray eyes scanning the crowd with the detached interest of someone who attended these functions out of obligation rather than enthusiasm. Marcus had inherited more than just sterling technologies from his father. He'd also inherited a healthy distrust of people's motivations. 3 failed relationships in the past 5 years had taught him that his bank account was often more attractive than his personality. The last woman, Clarissa, had been particularly devastating. She'd played the part of the loving girlfriend perfectly for 8 months before he discovered she'd been selling details about his business dealings to a competitor. The betrayal had left him hollow, suspicious, and convinced that genuine love was a luxury his wealth couldn't buy. Elena appeared beside him at the bar like a whisper of jasmine perfume and quiet confidence. She ordered a simple glass of red wine, her voice carrying the faintest trace of an accent he couldn't quite place. When she turned slightly, their eyes met for a brief moment. Hers were dark brown, almost black, with a depth that suggested stories he'd probably never hear. She smiled politely and moved away before he could say anything, but something about her lingered in the air like the last note of a beautiful song. "Another one caught your attention, I see," came a familiar voice behind him. Marcus turned to find his business partner and closest friend, David Chun, approaching with a knowing smirk. David had been trying to convince Marcus to date again for months, arguing that isolation was turning him into a bitter hermit. "Just observing," Marcus replied, taking another sip of his whiskey. "She's probably here with someone anyway." "Actually, she's not," David said, clearly having done his homework. "Elena Vasquez. She runs some kind of non-profit organization. Word is she's single and quite impressive, actually. Why don't you go talk to her?" Marcus shook his head. "I can already see the calculation in her eyes, David. She knows exactly who I am and what I'm worth." They all do. But even as he spoke the words, Marcus found himself watching Elena move through the crowd. Unlike the other single women at the event, she wasn't working the room with strategic precision. Instead, she seemed genuinely engaged with whoever she was speaking to, listening intently to an elderly woman's story, kneeling down to chat with a young cancer survivor, her face lighting up with authentic warmth. It was either a masterful performance or something Marcus hadn't seen in a very long time: genuine compassion. The evening's program began with the usual speeches from board members and major donors. Marcus had given his required remarks about Sterling Technologies' commitment to the cause, writing a substantial check as he did every year. As the formal portion wound down and the dancing began, he noticed Elena standing alone near the silent auction tables, studying the items with careful attention. Against his better judgment, Marcus found himself walking toward her. She was examining a weekend getaway package to Napa Valley, her brow slightly furrowed, as if she were doing mental calculations. "Thinking about bidding?" he asked immediately, regretting the generic opening line. Elena looked up, and again he was struck by those dark eyes. "Oh, hello. And yes, actually, it's for a good cause," and I haven't had a real vacation in. She paused, thinking, well, longer than I care to admit. Marcus Sterling, he said, extending his hand. I know who you are, she replied, shaking his hand briefly. Her grip was firm, no nonsense. Elena Vasquez, thank you for your contribution tonight. The Sunshine Foundation will be able to help a lot of families because of donors like you. There it was. She knew exactly who he was and what he was worth. Marcus felt his defenses rising automatically. The Sunshine Foundation? The nonprofit I run, Elena explained. We provide support services for families dealing with childhood cancer. Housing assistance, meal programs, emotional support, transportation to treatments. The basics that insurance doesn't always cover. Marcus nodded politely, but internally he was categorizing this interaction. She'd done her research, knew about his history with his sister's illness, and was now positioning herself as someone who shared his philanthropic interests. It was textbook gold digger behavior, even if it was more sophisticated than most. That must be rewarding work, he said, his tone cooling slightly. Elena seemed to notice the shift in his demeanor. Her smile became more polite, less warm. It is. If you'll excuse me, I should go find my table for dinner. As she walked away, Marcus felt both relief and an unexpected pang of disappointment. Relief because he'd maintained his emotional distance, disappointment because there had been something about her that seemed different. But seeming different was exactly what made the best con artists so effective. Dinner was a tedious affair of rubber chicken and small talk. Marcus sat at the head table with other major donors, half listening to conversations about market volatility and upcoming mergers. His attention kept drifting to Elena's table across the room. She was seated with what appeared to be other nonprofit workers and volunteers, not the usual crowd of socialites and trophy wives. Throughout the meal, she seemed more interested in the conversations around her than in making eye contact with him or any of the other wealthy men in the room. After dinner, as the band began playing and couples moved to the dance floor, Marcus stepped outside onto the hotel's terrace for some air. The October night was crisp, and the city lights sparkled below like fallen stars. He was surprised to find Elena already there, standing at the railing with her wine glass, looking out at the view. Beautiful night, he said, moving to stand a few feet away from her. It is, she agreed. I don't get to see the city from this angle very often. The Sunshine Foundation's office is down in the Mission District. Different view entirely. Marcus was familiar with the Mission. It wasn't exactly the kind of neighborhood where gold diggers typically spent their time. How long have you been running the organization? 5 years, Elena said, turning to face him. I started it after my nephew Carlos was diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia. My sister Maria is a single mother, works 2 jobs just to keep food on the table. When Carlos got sick, she had to choose between keeping her jobs and taking him to treatments. The system failed them, and I realized it was failing a lot of families. The emotion in her voice seemed genuine, but Marcus had learned not to trust his instincts when it came to women. That must have been difficult for your family. Carlos died when he was 7, Elena said quietly, looking back out at the city. But not before we learned how to help other families navigate the system better. The foundation has assisted over 300 families since then.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
Marcus felt an unexpected stab of sympathy. If she was lying, she was doing it with remarkable conviction. I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you. Elena finished her wine and set the glass on the railing. I should probably head home. Early morning tomorrow. What kind of early morning? Marcus found himself asking, though he wasn't sure why he cared. Food distribution at the hospital, Elena said. We provide meals for families camping out in the pediatric oncology ward. Most of them can't afford the cafeteria prices, and they won't leave their children's sides long enough to go find real food. She said it matter-of-factly, without any hint that she was trying to impress him with her charitable work. If anything, she seemed slightly uncomfortable discussing it. as if she didn't want to be seen as bragging about her good deeds. That's very generous of you, Marcus said. Elena shrugged. It's not generosity. It's necessity. These families are drowning, and if we can throw them a life preserver, why wouldn't we? As she started to walk back inside, Marcus called after her. Elena, would you like to have coffee sometime? She paused, studying his face in the dim terrace lighting. Why? The question caught him off guard. Most women would have said yes immediately, seeing an opportunity. I'd like to learn more about your work, he said, which was partially true. My work. Elena's tone suggested she found that hard to believe. Mr. Sterling, I appreciate the offer, but I get the impression you've already made up your mind about me. I'm not sure coffee would change that. Before he could ask what she meant, she was gone, leaving Marcus alone on the terrace with more questions than answers. Over the next few days, Marcus found himself thinking about Elena more than he cared to admit. He did what he always did. When someone intrigued him, he had his assistant researcher background. What he discovered didn't fit the gold digger profile at all. Elena Maria Vasquez, 32 years old, held a master's degree in social work from UC Berkeley. She'd worked for the county's Child Protective Services for 3 years before founding the Sunshine Foundation. She lived in a modest apartment in the Mission District, drove a 12-year-old Honda Civic, and according to the foundation's public tax filings, paid herself a salary of $45,000 a year while the organization distributed over $800,000 annually in aid. Either she was playing a very long game, or Marcus had misjudged her completely. The revelation bothered him more than he wanted to admit. He prided himself on reading people accurately, and the possibility that his cynicism had blinded him to someone genuine was unsettling. He decided to visit the Sunshine Foundation, telling himself it was due diligence for potential charitable giving, but knowing it was really about Elena. The foundation's office was located in a converted warehouse space, sharing the building with a community art center and a small grocery cooperative. Marcus had expected something more polished, more designed to impress potential donors. Instead, he found a bustling workspace that looked like it prioritized function over form. Elena was in the main room, surrounded by volunteers packing bags of groceries. She wore jeans and a simple gray sweater, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. When she looked up and saw him, surprise flickered across her face before settling into polite professionalism. Mr. Sterling, she said, approaching him with a questioning expression. This is unexpected. I was in the neighborhood, Marcus lied smoothly. Thought I'd stop by and see your operation firsthand. Elena nodded slowly, clearly not believing his excuse, but too polite to call him out on it. Well, you're welcome to look around. We're preparing emergency food packages today. Would you like a tour? As Elena showed him through the space, Marcus began to understand the scope of what she'd built. There was a resource library where families could access information about treatment options and financial assistance programs. A quiet room with comfortable chairs and toys where children could wait while their parents met with counselors. A small kitchen where volunteers prepared meals for hospital delivery. Everything was clean, organized, and clearly designed with the needs of stressed families in mind. How do you fund all of this? Marcus asked as they concluded the tour. Grants, individual donations, some corporate sponsorships, Elena said. We also do fundraising events, though nothing as fancy as last week's gala. More like car washes and bake sales. And you pay yourself $45,000 a year to run all of this. Elena's eyebrows rose slightly. You've done your homework. Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks. I like to know who I'm considering partnering with. Partnering with. Elena's tone was carefully neutral. Is that what this is? Before Marcus could answer, a young woman with a tired face and worried eyes approached them. She was holding the hand of a little girl who couldn't have been more than 5, wearing a bright yellow beanie that couldn't quite hide her baldness. Elena, the woman said in accented English, I wanted to thank you again for the gas card. We wouldn't have made it to Sophia's appointment yesterday without it. Elena's entire demeanor softened as she knelt down to the little girl's level. Hola, Sophia. How are you feeling today, mi amor? The little girl smiled shyly and whispered something in Spanish that made Elena laugh. They chatted for a few more minutes, Elena switching effortlessly between English and Spanish before the woman and child left with a bag of groceries. She's beautiful, Marcus said. Sophia's been fighting neuroblastoma for 2 years, Elena said, watching the pair leave. Her mother, Carmen, works nights cleaning office buildings. The treatments are in the afternoon, which means she loses pay every time they have an appointment. The gas cards help, but it's still not enough. Marcus found himself genuinely moved by the story, and by the way Elena told it without any apparent agenda. She wasn't trying to impress him or manipulate his emotions. She was simply sharing the reality of what she dealt with every day. Elena, he said impulsively, would you let me take you to dinner? Not coffee, a real dinner. She studied his face for a long moment. Why? There was that question again. This time, Marcus decided to be honest. Because I think I misjudged you at the gala, and I'd like the chance to know who you really are. Something shifted in Elena's expression, a slight softening around her eyes. Okay, she said finally, but somewhere quiet. I'm not really comfortable in places where the appetizers cost more than most people's grocery budget. They ended up at a small Italian restaurant in North Beach, the kind of place where the owner's grandmother still made the pasta and the wine list was written in chalk on a blackboard. Elena seemed more relaxed away from the formal setting of the gala, and Marcus found himself genuinely enjoying her company in a way he hadn't experienced in years. She told him about growing up in East San Jose, the daughter of immigrants who had worked multiple jobs to put her through college. About her nephew Carlos, whose battle with leukemia had opened her eyes to the gaps in the system. About the satisfaction she found in solving practical problems for families in crisis. Marcus found himself sharing more than he'd intended as well. He talked about the pressure of inheriting his father's empire, the difficulty of knowing whether people liked him for himself or his money, the loneliness that came with success. You know, Elena said as they shared tiramisu for dessert, I looked you up after the gala too. Marcus nearly choked on his wine. You did. MMM. I wanted to understand why you seemed so suspicious of me. Your ex-girlfriend selling your business. Secrets to competitors? That explains a lot. The directness of her observation caught him off guard. I suppose it does. For what it's worth, Elena continued, I think she did you a favor. Being that suspicious and cynical, it must be exhausting. It's protective, Marcus said defensively. Maybe, Elena said. But what's the point of protecting yourself if you end up alone in a fortress? The question haunted Marcus as he drove home that night. Elena had a way of cutting through his defenses with simple observations that hit far too close to the truth. He'd built walls to keep gold diggers and opportunists out, but in the process, he'd also locked out the possibility of genuine connection. Over the next several weeks, Marcus found himself spending more and more time with Elena. They attended a poetry reading in the Mission District, where Elena seemed to know half the audience. They went hiking in Marin County, where she packed sandwiches and insisted on splitting the gas money. They visited art galleries and farmers markets, always splitting the bill despite Marcus's protests. Elena treated him like a normal person, not a walking bank account. She challenged his opinions, laughed at his terrible jokes, and seemed genuinely interested in his thoughts and feelings rather than his portfolio. Slowly, almost without realizing it, Marcus began to let his guard down. The shift became apparent. One evening, when they were having dinner at Elena's apartment, she'd cooked arroz con pollo from her grandmother's recipe, and they were sharing a bottle of wine she'd brought back from a work conference in Napa. The apartment was small but warm, filled with photographs of her family and artwork from local artists. I have something to confess, Elena said as they cleaned up the dishes together. Marcus tensed automatically. This was usually when the other shoe dropped, when the real agenda revealed itself. I actually knew who you were before the gala. Elena continued. I'd seen articles about Sterling Technologies in the business journals. I knew about your sister's battle with leukemia, and I knew you were a major donor to childhood cancer research. Marcus set down the dish he was drying. And And nothing, Elena said, seeming confused by his reaction. I'm just saying I wasn't completely ignorant of your background when we met. I don't want you to think I was being dishonest. The confession was so benign, so unnecessary, that Marcus almost laughed. Any woman with ulterior motives would have kept that information to herself, used it to maintain the illusion of accidental meetings and shared interests. Elena, he said, why are you telling me this? She shrugged, hanging up the dish towel. Because I like you, and I want to be honest with you. Secrets have a way of poisoning things, don't they? It was such a simple statement, but it hit Marcus like a revelation. Elena wasn't playing games or working angles. She was just being straightforward and genuine, qualities so rare in his world that he'd almost forgotten they existed. That night, as they sat on her couch sharing stories about their childhoods, Marcus realized he was falling in love. Not with the carefully constructed persona of someone trying to win him over, but with the authentic, complicated, passionate woman who challenged him to be better than his cynicism allowed. The realization terrified him. Marcus had been in relationships before, but this felt different. Elena made him want to be the kind of man worthy of her respect, not just her attention. She made him think about legacy and meaning in ways that went beyond stock prices and market share. For the first time in his adult life, he found himself imagining a future that wasn't just about accumulating more wealth and influence. But old habits died hard. Even as his feelings for Elena deepened, a small voice in the back of his mind whispered warnings. She was too good to be true. Nobody was that genuine, that selfless, that real. There had to be an angle he wasn't seeing, a long-term strategy he hadn't figured out yet. The voice grew louder when Elena mentioned needing to take a few days off to visit her father in Los Angeles. Her explanation was vague, something about family business that couldn't be postponed. Marcus offered to drive her down or pay for a flight, but Elena declined, saying she preferred to take the train and use the time to think. During the 3 days she was gone, Marcus found himself checking his phone obsessively, waiting for texts that came sporadically and seemed oddly formal. When she returned, something had shifted. Elena was quieter, more distracted, as if her mind was elsewhere even when they were together. Is everything okay with your family? Marcus asked one evening as they walked along the Embarcadero. Elena had been unusually silent, staring out at the bay with a troubled expression. It's complicated, she said, which wasn't really an answer. Complicated how? Elena stopped walking and turned to face him. In the fading light, her dark eyes looked almost black. Marcus, what would you do if you learned that everything you thought you knew about someone was wrong? The question sent a chill down Marcus's spine. I guess it would depend on what I learned and why they kept it from me. Elena nodded slowly, as if processing his answer. And if they'd kept it from you to protect you? Protect me from what? But Elena just shook her head. I'm sorry. I'm being unfair, asking hypothetical questions about situations you don't understand. That night, Marcus lay awake trying to decode Elena's strange mood and cryptic questions. Was she trying to tell him something about herself? Was she preparing to reveal some secret that would change everything between them? His old paranoia crept back in, whispering that he'd been right all along to be suspicious. The answer came 2 weeks later in the most unexpected way possible. Marcus was sitting beside his father's hospital bed, watching the machines that were keeping Thomas Sterling alive. At 78, his father had built an empire and earned the respect of everyone in Silicon Valley. He'd also been fighting pancreatic cancer for 6 months, a battle he was slowly but steadily losing. The doctors had said Thomas might have weeks left, possibly days. Marcus had been spending every free moment at the hospital, handling business calls from the bedside, and trying to come to terms with the idea of losing the man who had shaped his entire worldview. Thomas drifted in and out of consciousness, the pain medication making him confused and sometimes incoherent. But this afternoon, his eyes were clear when they focused on Marcus's face. Son, Thomas said, his voice barely a whisper, there's something I need to tell you. About Elena. Marcus felt his blood freeze. Dad, Elena Vasquez. Thomas continued, struggling to speak clearly. I know you've been seeing her. How could you possibly know that? Marcus asked, though he supposed it wasn't surprising. His father had spent decades building networks of information throughout the city. Because, Thomas said, his eyes filling with something that looked like regret, I've been having her watched. For months. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. You what? After what happened with Clarissa, I couldn't let you get hurt again, Thomas whispered. I hired a private investigator to look into any woman you showed interest in. When you started seeing Elena, I had them dig deeper. Marcus felt sick. The violation of Elena's privacy, the betrayal of trust, the implication that his father thought he couldn't take care of himself. It was all overwhelming. Dad, how could you do that? Because I love you, Thomas said simply. And because I discovered something you need to know. Thomas reached into the bedside table drawer with shaking hands and pulled out a manila folder. The investigator found this. Elena's real background. Her real story. With growing dread, Marcus opened the folder. Inside were photographs, documents, financial records, and detailed reports spanning Elena's entire life. But as he read, his confusion only grew. Everything confirmed what he already knew about Elena. Her work, her family, her finances, it was all exactly as she presented it. Dad, I don't understand, Marcus said. This just proves that everything she told me is true. Keep reading, Thomas whispered. Marcus flipped through more pages until he found a birth certificate that made his heart stop. Elena Maria Vasquez, born in San Jose, California. Mother, Maria Esperanza Vasquez. Father, Thomas Andrew Sterling. The folder slipped from Marcus's numb fingers, scattering papers across the hospital floor. This can't be real. Your half-sister, Thomas said, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. I had an affair 32 years ago. Maria Vasquez worked as a housekeeper for one of our clients. I was young and stupid and thought I could keep it secret forever. Marcus stared at his father in horror. Elena is my sister? I never told anyone. Thomas continued, his voice getting weaker. I sent money for years, anonymously, through lawyers. I made sure Elena got into good schools, that she had opportunities. But I never contacted them directly. I thought it was better that way. The room spun around Marcus as the implications crashed over him. Elena wasn't a gold digger. She was his half-sister. Every moment they'd spent together, every feeling he'd developed, every plan he'd made for their future, it was all based on a relationship that could never exist. The investigator figured it out when he accessed Elena's sealed birth records. Thomas whispered, That's when I realized what had happened. What you two had started to. I didn't know how to tell you. Marcus thought he might throw up. Does she know? I think so, Thomas said. The investigator believes someone tipped her off recently. Probably why she's been acting strange. Suddenly, Elena's odd behavior made sense. Her trip to Los Angeles to see family. Her cryptic questions about secrets and protection. Her growing distance over the past few weeks. She'd discovered the truth about their relationship and had been trying to figure out how to handle it. Son, Thomas said, gripping Marcus's hand with surprising strength. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for all of it. For the affair, for keeping it secret, for not telling you sooner. I thought I was protecting everyone, but I just made everything worse. Marcus sat in stunned silence, trying to process the magnitude of what he'd learned. The woman he'd fallen in love with, the woman he'd been planning to propose to, was his half-sister. The relationship that had made him believe in love again was built on a foundation of lies and secrets, even if Elena had been as ignorant of the truth as he was. What am I supposed to do now? Marcus asked, though he wasn't sure if he was talking to his father or himself. You find a way to be the brother she's needed all her life, Thomas whispered. You make sure she knows she's not alone in the world. You be better than I was. Thomas Sterling died 3 days later, taking his secrets and regrets to the grave. Marcus handled the funeral arrangements in a daze, going through the motions, while his mind struggled to accept the new reality of his life. Elena attended the service, standing in the back with other community leaders and business associates. She wore a simple black dress and kept her eyes downcast throughout the ceremony. When people offered their condolences, she accepted them, graciously but briefly, as if she were trying not to draw attention to herself. Marcus wanted to talk to her, but he wasn't sure what to say. How do you apologize for unknowingly falling in love with your sister? How do you explain feelings that were genuine but inappropriate? How do you move forward when the foundation of your relationship has been revealed as fundamentally impossible? After the burial, as the crowd dispersed, Elena approached him quietly. Her eyes were red from crying, and she looked like she hadn't slept in days. "Marcus," she said softly, "I'm so sorry for your loss." "Elena," he started, but she held up her hand. "I know," she said simply. "I know what he told you. I know what you found out." They stood in awkward silence beside Thomas Sterling's grave, two people who had found love in the wrong place with the wrong person. Finally, Elena spoke again. "I found out 3 weeks ago," she said. "My mother finally told me the truth about my father when I pressed her about some documents I found. She'd kept it secret my whole life, just like he did." "Why didn't you tell me immediately?" Marcus asked. Elena's laugh was bitter and sad. "How was I supposed to do that? Hi, Marcus. I just discovered that the man I'm falling in love with is actually my half-brother. It's not exactly a conversation you know how to have. So what do we do now?" Marcus asked. Elena looked out across the cemetery, her expression distant. "We figure out how to be family instead of whatever we were becoming." The adjustment was harder than either of them had anticipated. Marcus found himself grieving not just the loss of his father, but the loss of Elena as a romantic partner. She'd been the first woman he'd trusted completely, the first person who'd made him want to build a life with someone else. Learning that those feelings had to be redirected into familial love felt like losing her all over again. For Elena, the situation was equally complicated. She'd grown up without a father, always wondering about the man who had contributed to her existence but never acknowledged her. Finding out that her father was Thomas Sterling meant grappling with decades of resentment and abandonment, while also trying to build a relationship with the brother she'd never known existed. They met for coffee a few weeks after the funeral, both of them careful to choose a neutral, public location. The easy intimacy they'd shared was gone, replaced by awkward politeness and careful boundaries. "I keep expecting this to feel natural," Elena said, stirring sugar into her latte. "The sibling thing. But it doesn't." "Maybe it takes time," Marcus suggested, though he wasn't sure he believed it himself. "Maybe." Elena was quiet for a moment. "I looked up Sterling Technologies' charitable giving records. You've been donating to childhood cancer research for years, long before we met. But you never gave anything to organizations serving low-income families." Marcus wasn't sure if she was making an observation or an accusation. "I focused on medical research because of my sister's experience." "Our sister," Elena corrected gently. "And I'm not criticizing your choices. I'm just thinking about how different our worlds have been. You grew up with everything, the best schools, opportunities, connections. I grew up wondering if we'd have enough money for groceries." The disparity in their upbringings was something Marcus had always been aware of intellectually, but hearing Elena articulate it made the injustice feel more personal. Thomas Sterling had ensured his legitimate son inherited an empire while his daughter scraped together funding for a nonprofit organization. "I want to change that," Marcus said impulsively. "The foundation's funding situation, I mean. I want to help." Elena's expression became guarded. "Marcus, I appreciate the offer, but I don't want charity. Especially not from you." "It wouldn't be charity," Marcus insisted. "It would be, I don't know, justice? Making up for lost time?" "You can't buy a relationship with me," Elena said firmly. "That's not how family works." The accusation stung because Marcus realized she was right. His instinct was to solve problems with money, to use his wealth to bridge gaps and fix complications. But the gap between them couldn't be bridged with donations, and the complications couldn't be fixed with financial support. "I'm sorry," Marcus said. "You're right. I'm still learning how to do this." "We both are," Elena said, her tone softening slightly. But Marcus, I need you to understand something. I didn't fall in love with your money. I fell in love with the man who listened to Sophia speak Spanish and asked thoughtful questions about her treatment. The man who talked about feeling lonely, despite being surrounded by people. The man who made me laugh and challenged my assumptions about wealthy people. The use of past tense, fell in love rather than love, cut through Marcus like a blade. But he understood what Elena was trying to tell him. The feelings had been real, even if the relationship couldn't be. I fell in love with a woman who dedicated her life to helping families like ours would have been if our father had acknowledged you, Marcus said, who treated me like a normal person instead of a walking investment. Opportunity, who made me want to be better than my cynicism. They sat in silence for a few minutes, both mourning what they'd lost and trying to figure out what they could build in its place. I have an idea, Elena said finally. What if we started over? Not as strangers, but as siblings who are getting to know each other. We can talk about our childhoods, our dreams, our frustrations. We can learn how to be brother and sister. It wasn't what Marcus wanted, but it was what they needed. I'd like that. Over the following months, Marcus and Elena slowly built a different kind of relationship. They met regularly for lunch or dinner, sharing stories about their lives and trying to find common ground beyond their shared genetics. Marcus learned about Elena's struggles to fund the Sunshine Foundation, her complicated relationship with their father's memory, and her dreams of expanding services to more families. Elena learned about Marcus's pressure to live up to Thomas Sterling's legacy, his difficulty forming genuine relationships, and his growing interest in using his wealth for meaningful philanthropy rather than just tax benefits. Gradually, they found their rhythm as siblings. Marcus became Elena's advisor on financial strategy and business development, helping the Sunshine Foundation operate more efficiently and reach more families. Elena became Marcus's conscience and guide, challenging him to think beyond profit, margins, and consider the human impact of his business decisions. When Elena's apartment building was sold and she faced eviction, Marcus helped her find a new place, not by buying her a house, which had been his first instinct, but by using his connections to find affordable housing in a neighborhood she actually wanted to live in. When Marcus struggled with a hostile takeover attempt at Sterling Technologies, Elena reminded him that his employees were people with families and mortgages, not just line items on a balance sheet. The relationship wasn't perfect. They still had moments of awkwardness, still sometimes caught themselves relating to each other in ways that felt more romantic than familial. But slowly, they built something genuine and valuable, a real sibling bond based on mutual respect and understanding. A year after Thomas Sterling's death, Marcus stood in the ballroom of the same hotel where he'd first met Elena. This time, he was the one giving the keynote address at the Sunshine Foundation's annual fundraiser. Elena had grown the organization dramatically over the past year, with Marcus's strategic advice and a network of donors he'd introduced her to. My father taught me that success is measured by what you accumulate, Marcus said, looking out at the crowd of supporters. But my sister taught me that impact is measured by what you give away. In the audience, Elena smiled and wiped away a tear. The acknowledgement meant more than any romantic gesture ever could have. For the first time in her life, she had a family member who was proud to claim her publicly. After the event, as they worked together to clean up and pack leftover supplies, Marcus reflected on how much his life had changed. A year ago, he'd been a lonely, suspicious man convinced that everyone wanted something from him. Tonight, he was working side by side with his sister to load boxes of supplies into her aging Honda Civic, and he'd never felt more fulfilled. Elena, he said as they finished loading the last box, do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd never found out? If Dad had taken the secret to his grave? Elena considered the question seriously. I think we would have destroyed each other eventually, she said quietly. The guilt, the wrongness of it, even without knowing why. Some truths have a way of surfacing. She closed the car trunk and looked at him. Besides, I'd rather have you as the brother who chose to love me than the man who felt obligated to. Marcus smiled. understanding finally that some relationships were worth more than romance could ever offer. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.